You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. From the Dunning-Kruger Effect to not using the scientific method, this week we're channeling our blue-collar comedy tour and talking about signs that you might be a bad developer and how to fix it. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Well, I'm actually ready for the jump to Linux. Everything is working. I'm putting off moving my desktop over to it. Like, I got all the main tasks done, and then I had told myself that one of my games I was going to beat every quest in. Mainly to spread out the hardware frustrations a little bit, because they got a little concentrated there for a while, if you remember.
Yeah.
And that is just a little bit unpleasant, so I'm giving it a little bit more time so I don't feel like my entire life is network wiring and all those kinds of fun things. Plus, I'm waiting for some work to drop off, be a little bit easier. That said, I did have a rather interesting Linux experience that was kind of embarrassing in retrospect. But I'll go ahead and share it, because this will tell everybody, this will happen to you at some point and you're going to feel real stupid. So I'm sitting there and I'm writing systemd scripts, right? So I got a couple of daemons I need to get to run on startup. There's C-file and there's the C-hub that's the web version of it. And there were two or three other. I had to get MySQL working right because it wasn't doing things right. Oh, by the way, it's systemd, not init.d in the new Ubuntu server. So I wasted a little bit of time on that, but, that's no big deal, right? So I'm writing these scripts and they're not super nasty, but that's fairly decent sysadmin stuff. I get wine configured. I get Scrivener on the box so that I can manage all my writing stuff. I get Visual Studio Code. I test out some, MVC stuff, and I'm like, oh, I need to change the icon for Scrivener that's on the quick launch panel, right? Because it's the wine icon, so it looks like a wine glass, which every wine app would look that way. So you wouldn't be able to tell what you're clicking on. It's like, oh, okay, I'll change it. And so I right click and pops up a window, and there's nowhere that looked obvious to me to change the icon. So I'm thinking, okay, these people don't want to let you change the icon. Let's see if we can do it anyway. And so I bounce around and I go through some stuff. I find some JSON files because I start, digging around like in the Cinnamon desktop stuff.
Yeah.
And I edited some JSON files, and that didn't work. And of course, you always revert them after, because you don't know what they do. If it didn't do what you thought it did, it's there for a reason. So put it back. And so that didn't work. And I asked questions in Linux forums, and I was just all over the place. And after about 2.5 hours, I opened the thing up again. Oh, man, there's got to be something, and I'm looking, and I just happened to see, the thing's got the icon there, and it didn't really look all that obvious to me. You picked it out immediately what it was, but all you had to do is click on it. Yeah. So, there's some people on the internet that think I'm a flaming idiot right now, and it's really hard to contest that one.
Well, that's funny, because just today I was working on a search function and building it pretty much from the ground up within our app. So I did the API from everything from the controller to the repository calling to the database. And then I went and I did the Angular front end, and I put everything in there. And in the middle of all of it, Windows updated. So that took about 2 hours out of my day. But then I'm I get back into it and I finish everything up. I do my ng repeats and my table to display everything, ready to test it out. And one of my coworkers, who is a front-end developer, comes over and was like, oh, hey, I've been working on this. You know this stuff really well. Check it out. And I go in there. Guess what I forgot? The search button.
Oh.
So I had everything there. You could type in all of your search criteria, and the function, the Angular function was there.
You just have anything to click on.
There was nothing to call it.
Oh, man.
I was like, hang on, this will take just a second to fix.
Yeah.
So we all have those moments.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the Windows update. I don't know, did we mention on the podcast what happened?
No, we haven't, because that happened the last time we tried to record.
Yeah. So we sat here for 4.5 hours watching the little thing spin, saying Windows is getting ready to update your computer, and a guest sat here with us for 4.5 hours. We're not overly pleased with Microsoft right now, and it's probably better that we just say, yeah, we're very displeased with you, and go on, because it's a PG show, and we don't want to insult anybody's distant ancestors or their personal habits, or talk about their destination after they depart this earth. So we'll go on with the music.
This week for IoTs, I have a music-related project. It is a Wi-Fi Arduino-based music maker. The creator of this is Vaughn Cotter, and it's another good starter project, or maybe one you could do with the kids. Project runs on a web server running JavaScript. With it, you can basically build your own music, kind of like the old 8-bit Nintendo type music is what it sounds like. He's got a really cool YouTube video out there. But you get to select the octave, the note, the length. It draws out the musical notation as you input the notes, and then you can set it to play it or play just a portion of it. The software for the device is available on GitHub, and the hardware is an Arduino Uno, Particle Spark Core, a speaker, and the Adafruit RGB backlight LCD. Just a fun little project that you can do. It's good for learning about music and learning about doing IoT. Be a lot of fun if you have kids kind of at that age where they're wanting to build stuff and make stuff. We have anyone talking to us this week?
Not this week. I do know a guy that's putting in a iTunes review, but it hadn't made it through. There's kind of that latency.
No, that's true. So guys, if you would like some complete developer podcast swag, we've been offering a coffee mug or water bottle. So far, the most popular has been the water bottle. So I think we're going to order a bunch of those to get out, because a lot of people seem to like that. We're also looking at some better quality coffee mugs too. But if you would like something, we really would like to hear from you. We do interact with the people that contact us and leave us reviews. We've made friends that way.
Yeah.
If you guys have listened from early on, our audio quality has gotten a lot better because of one of the friends we made interacting with someone who commented on Twitter.
Yeah, and we've had, honestly, we get show ideas. We really get a lot out of our community.
We do.
Except for comments.
Yeah. Yeah, and we know a lot of you guys comment on some of our posts and stuff. It's just sort of specific to that. What we're really looking for with this, tell us what you think about an episode or a show.
Or give us a show idea, and you could be mentioned when we do it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So just remember, we post all our episodes to Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Google+. Leave us a comment. A great way to get in touch with us is on Twitter at CompleteDevPod, or you can get a hold of me at BowtieBeach, or Will at his company site
at GantSoftSys. Yeah, and especially if you're on Google+, if you're one of the lone voices in the wilderness out there, cry out to us.
Yeah.
Because you'll be the first one who ever does.
That's true. So, getting into the episode, Will wrote this outline. Why you might not know you are a bad developer.
Yeah. And I've had some interactions with a few that, and I've been the developer in that situation too. So it's not, it's not a high and mighty point, I guess, but there's a couple, there's several different reasons.
It scares me to think of the people who would consider you a bad developer.
Well, I mean, you go through a growth curve.
I can see that, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you're not on point with things, if you're just you're going through the motions because it's a bad environment or it's not working for you, you can very easily become a bad developer even when you're not the rest of the time.
Okay. I can see what you're saying.
And, towards this, there's a couple things that will apply. One is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which is basically, you don't know you're an idiot.
Yeah.
That's a better way to put it.
Second order ignorant.
Yeah, and not even really. It's not really even a second order ignorance thing. It's a thing of having a belief that you're better than you are, which pretty much hits every one of us at some level.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm awesome. Everybody knows it.
Well, the thing is
I'm so awesome. I don't even have to write search buttons.
Yeah. Well, when you find out you're in Dunning-Kruger Club, you're not in it anymore. So another one is survivorship bias. And this is something that you'll see when you're terrible, but everybody around you's worse. And this happens a lot of times on the tail end of corporate wind downs, like where they're starting to have a whole lot of outsourcing and a whole lot of downsizing towards the end. Like you might be the best developer there and still be terrible, because
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I can completely see that.
Because all the ones smarter than you left.
Yeah.
It's very easy to be the one-eyed man in the land of the blind.
I could see that also happening to junior developers after year or two working, where you get in somewhere and you're their star developer.
Yeah.
And you may be a good junior developer, but you're a good junior developer.
Yeah, and I worked at one place. I've actually had a couple of these. One where they had massive turnover. Like I was there, I think 8.5 months, and I went from obviously being the newest person on the team to the second most senior developer they had on a staff of 30. And I wasn't that good. Like I've actually found some of the code that I wrote then, not so much, but you're kind of second from the top at that point. So yeah, that's the whole survivorship bias thing. Mm-hmm. Another way to get there is if you stay in one place for a long time, you can kind of coast on your knowledge. Yeah,
because the system.
Yeah.
Like the code base really well doesn't mean that you know how to code really well.
Right. And it doesn't mean that you do very well, especially as technology changes, because you're in a position to resist. You're in a position to push it off on other people. You've got a lot of leverage that you can utilize to keep from realizing how bad you are.
And a lot of these are less about the quality of the code doing most of the work and more about your own impact on the development ecosystem around you.
Yeah. Because, the thing is messy code that still compiles and runs correctly is okay as far as the computer's concerned. It either works or it doesn't. The computer's very binary, but like with other people, that's really where the problems come in.
So getting into it, you might be a bad developer if you don't test your code.
Yes. And, most people do test, but a lot of pretty poor developers test just the happy path. In other words, what happens when everything works?
Yes.
And it always works on their machine because, hey, it's a development box. The files are in the right location. All the security stuff is set right because, it's running as you and you put the file there. There's no network, the network's not intermittent because you're not going over the network. Database is local.
Well, isn't that what testing in QA is for, though?
It is, but if it goes that far, even if it gets out to dev and you haven't tested it locally and actually tried to break it, it's going to break out there, and those breaks are more expensive because the cycle time, the ability to iterate.
That's true.
On the bug.
So if you can catch it while you're still in dev, while you're still writing it.
Yeah. Okay. And part of it too is that other people don't see that you suck. It's okay to be terrible as long as they don't know, right?
Yeah.
Or it's okay to feel like maybe I'm not so good, but if the stuff you release is solid, that's what people see. It's sort of a first draft kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If you write your first draft of a novel and you send it out to everybody, and then a year later you come back and you edit, well, it takes you forever to get anything done, which looks bad. And everybody saw the bad work product. It makes it much worse. A lot of these are really about actually being able to iterate quickly and being able to work with your code base efficiently. That's how you actually become good. It's not knowledge as much as anything else. Because knowledge, you go to Google for a lot of things.
So you should test edge cases?
Yeah. Especially, like I said, missing files, security issues, the network goes down in the middle. We're having a problem at work right now with one of our products. If you leave it open for too long and the database connection has a blip, that product blows up. It's a configuration panel. So it's not like business critical, hey, everything's down, but it wasn't written to handle intermittent connections. So yeah, we gotta fix that. Things like bad user inputs. It's not just like SQL injection, but stuff like, if you've got a field, or let's say you've got something coming in from an API and it's taking a piece of text that is supposed to represent a date, and they just put blah, blah in there. Well, if you try to parse that as a date and use it somewhere critical, that's a problem. Like, you should test for bad user input. Mm-hmm. Just test for all the things that can break the system.
Okay.
You also have to make sure that code really works, and doesn't just work like if you execute a particular sequence of events in a row. Like
what do you mean?
Like the product I'm working on right now, we had a previous developer who, if you knew exactly the right places to click and which order to click going through this web system, you could do the thing that the system was designed to do. If you deviated from that at all because he crammed everything into session state and was heavily dependent on session state, you wouldn't have this appropriate state when you got there, and things would blow up.
Oh.
He wasn't testing how you got to stuff. It was, it works on this one repetitive path that I tested 1 billion times, but there's 100 other ways to get there, and I didn't test those at all.
Oh, yeah. We're dealing with some state stuff at work.
Yeah. Well, you're at the state, technically.
Yeah, but I mean, with session state and
yo, dog.
Yeah.
Heard you like the state.
We found some interesting things to make that easier with Angular.
Yeah. Point number 2, you might be a bad developer if you never log anything, or you log everything without being able to configure logging. This is one that's actually pretty bad for me, at least where I'm working right now, because we have like 4 different logging frameworks we're trying to use, and you don't ever know which one's actually the one that's configured. Got a little issue there. You can hook up a debugger to the code when you're in development, and so a lot of developers will go, well, there's no reason to log. I can just set a breakpoint and I can hop right into where it's executing, and that's fine until you actually get the code out in production. And once the code is in production, suddenly you can't drop a debugger in it because, hey, this is a production system and there's Sarbanes-Oxley requirements around it, and people like you don't touch that system. And the only way you're going to know what actually happened at 2 o'clock in the morning when something went down because of some weird edge case is to have a log. You can you can create a lot of problems by not having a decent logging setup and actually using it. And like I said, this is one that I have a lot of trouble with because I don't think to log as often as I should. Like, I log exceptions, but going, hey, something came in, because you also want to have different levels of logging. Like, you may want to have a debug level where somebody can turn it on and get all the stuff that happened that led up to a particular thing. Or you may want to have it where it just logs, fatal errors.
See, this is something that we're about to add, because what I'm working on is actually a brand new product that's not in production right now, and we're about to add logging really soon. Yeah,
I mean, you do really have to be able to do that, though, because that's considerate for the people that you're deploying onto their system.
Like, on the front end,
console log.
Yeah, log to the console, because that tells me what's going on.
It does, but here's something I see with front-end developers, is they'll log to the console, and that's great until you've got a user that's a total noob that happens to be a president of the company or something like that. And, this is broken. Well, what'd you do? I don't know. It just broke. You can't see his console log because he's shut his machine down to come in there to yell at you.
Yeah.
So how are you going to log it? Well, if that thing is calling back to the server when it's logging, you can do it. Now, you don't want to do that for everything, obviously, because that's a bunch of web traffic you don't want. But
yeah, well, you would want to do that for if something fails.
Yeah. Well, you can make it configurable too.
Okay.
Potentially, right? But you do have to have a pretty good practice of logging things in place so that your code is actually stable when it gets running. That way, hopefully, you don't get called at 2 o'clock in the morning and get to go debugging. One thing to go, okay, we know what it is, and we'll fix that, come 10 o'clock or something.
All right, I see what you're saying. So, next, you might be a bad developer if you think that Java is the best for all purposes, because everyone knows that .NET is for everything.
Actually, you might be a terrible programmer if you think your framework is the best for all purposes.
Yeah. I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, it is.
Obviously, this is wildly inaccurate, even with a subset of the market, like web.
Right. Because I don't know how many times I've heard somebody go, Ruby's the best, Python's the best.
Perl is the best. Duh.
Yeah. Perl is interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing is use the proper tool for the job.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what is actually the best tool is not just a technical consideration, but it's also like, what else can the rest of the team actually do? Like if you're on a team of Java developers and you're convinced that Python is the best way to solve this problem, it isn't, more than likely, because how much is it going to cost to train the rest of the team? Yeah. Like look at the over under on how much more productive do they have to be to pay for the time to transition and lost time on the project. And I run into a ton of developers that have this particular attitude, and also like the sneering stuff that really gets me.
It closes you off from learning things about other frameworks.
Yeah, like for instance, Lambda expressions, when those hit C#, and this dates my skills obviously, but I learned about those because I'd already been using them in Ruby on Rails. That's what I was doing on the side. The same thing with.
Is it true? I heard somewhere that Java doesn't have Lambda expressions.
I don't know anymore. And I learned, I was comfortable with generics in C# because I'd done them in C++ with, templates.
Yeah. Okay.
I was comfortable with, link type statements in C# because I had done list comprehensions in Python.
Cool.
Yeah. It's just a lot of like, you can steal stuff from other languages and you'll be surprised how much that will come back into the language that you already use or will give you a different approach.
I completely follow that because I've been told that my JavaScript is similar to C#. Like I've gotten stuff from C# that I've taken into JavaScript and vice versa.
Yeah. And especially if you do TypeScript.
Yeah. I wish we used TypeScript. I love that stuff.
Yeah, I do too. I like that better than I do JavaScript, although I like JavaScript a lot.
I'm beginning to really enjoy JavaScript. The more I do it.
And the nice thing about it is that people leave it alone. Like if it works, they don't refactor it.
Yes.
So you can actually make something beautiful and it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, if you can make something horrible and it's still there too.
Well, there is that.
Now, it's okay to say that, the framework you're using is the one that works best for you. Or best in a particular situation out of what you've seen.
Well, yeah, like you're building certain things.
Yeah.
.NET is going to be the best for you because that's what you know the most.
Yeah, like if you're interfacing with SQL Server, they've built so much stuff into that. It's hard not to go for that language. Mm-hmm. Even with all the development and all these others, it's just like you got $1 billion company pouring investment into this thing to make your scenario work.
Exactly.
Like, you might as well use that.
Next, you might be a bad developer if you don't spend time improving your skills. Really, this one, if you don't spend time improving your skills, here's your sign.
Yeah, that's just dumb.
Yeah. That's just like...
that is the best way in the world to fall behind as the market changes. Like, I've known quite a few developers who work somewhere for 8 or 10 years, and they'll start and they'll be a reasonably good developer there, and they keep doing exactly that technology. And then 8 or 10 years later, that technology's left in the dust. They're still there, and hey, there's a round of downsizing and outsourcing. Guess who gets kicked to the curb? Guess who gets to try to learn another language while they're trying to figure out how they're going to eat? And I've known quite a few developers that have done that over the years, and that is not a place to be.
Well, I have a coworker that is a pretty good classic ASP developer.
Yeah.
We still have a few classic ASP apps, but we're moving away from that. We're in all the new stuff, and a lot of stuff is transitioning to ASP.NET. And
well, I can't say much. I'm doing Delphi.
Well, yeah, but like we're transitioning and Angular, and it's like she is working hard to learn the new stuff. So
yeah, and that's what you're supposed to do. I've had quite a few really stupid conversations with other developers about this, so I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. When you don't spend time improving your skills, it shows that you do not prioritize your career. Frankly, like I've heard the excuse, oh, well, I think they ought to pay for my subscription. They ought to pay for my time to learn this stuff. It's like, dude, you work a 40-hour-a-week job, probably. You get paid more than enough to pay for like a Pluralsight subscription. I mean, mine's like $45 a month.
Mine's less than that because I don't have the one where you can download stuff.
Yeah. And it works just fine. And I can go through hours and hours of training, and that's not that is not enough money to go, oh, I can't possibly spend this. It's like, no, if you've got a development salary and you can't spend that, you need to reprioritize. Mm-hmm. That's just all there is to it. Like if you want to stay in this industry, keep up. And no, this should not be on your employer. Okay. That's fundamentally stupid to do. For one thing, your employer has interest in you learning a specific set of skills that are useful to them. They have to show ROI on that. And it may not be what you want to do. It may be something completely different. And if you want to go get a job doing something else, well, what are you going to do? Oh yeah. Hey, can you pay for a course for me to do, Ruby on Rails and, Postgres and, Linux kernel development? I know I'm like doing, WinForms apps and stuff. And I know that we're going to be doing, SSRS and, WPF, but, can you teach me, you pay for me to do these other things? They're going to be like, why are you doing that? It makes it like you're telegraphing the fact that you're going to leave.
Well, I'll tell you this. We have a friend that is a designer. Designers don't get paid what
right. Designers get paid awfully.
She's a designer in school to be a developer. So not only is she at a lower paying job, but also is paying her way through school. She asked me about learning some Angular, and I told her, I was like, Pluralsight course is really good. I was like, but you kind of have to get a subscription. They're about, it's like you can get a month for free and then it's like $20, $30. She's like, oh, well, that's not much.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, so somebody that's making a lot less than a developer and is paying her way through school can afford
it's because,
to do that.
Well, and I know who you're talking about. She's got a lot of hustle.
She does, yeah.
And, that's really what it comes down to is a thing of, I want my life to be better and I'm not leaving it to other people.
Exactly.
And you have to have some self-ownership. If you don't, you're maybe you're not a terrible developer today, but you will be.
This is how you become a terrible developer.
Yeah. It'll happen eventually. And the way it will happen will be a thing that is, you'll insist vehemently that was never your fault. And it always was. Anyway, rant off. And let's start another one.
Go for it.
Put a few more in the row. You don't understand databases. If you don't understand databases, you're probably going to have a bad time as a developer.
Honestly, it's pretty rare to find an application that doesn't have to store data.
Yeah, and search it.
Yeah.
In some fashion.
I mean, just, the basic stuff. Like when I was first learning like .NET, the basic kind of apps I was writing were CRUD apps.
Yeah.
Create, read,
update, delete. Yeah. But I mean, like every app pretty much is created around data. Yeah. It's either using data to do something or it's, hey, I'm acquiring this data because somebody wants to mine it for some purpose. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand a database, you are completely hamstringing yourself. Like it is absolutely foolish. If you can't write SQL, and the thing that gets me is the number of developers that I see that their chosen framework has got an ORM. This is one of the main reasons I really don't like ORMs. And they go, oh, well, I've got an entity framework. I've got it in Hibernate. I've got whatever. I don't have to learn SQL because I can do it in this. Like I don't have to understand how SQL works. And, I've had quite a few conversations with those people. They don't want to
y'all can't see my face, but
yeah, they don't want to do a stored procedure or anything like that. And it's like, guys, you're bad.
That's hilarious. I had a conversation today about this exact thing. The other .NET developer and I were basically pulling the max value and adding one rather than using a sequence.
Yeah.
That way you can show them, here's the value, and if they don't save it, then you don't lose that iteration in the sequence. And she said, I think we might be able to figure out how to do it in Hibernate. And so, okay. I was working on the front end while she was looking that up, and then she called me over. She's like, here's what I found. What do you think? And it wasn't working. I said, well, hey, couldn't we just write a stored proc in the database and then just call it within Hibernate? And she looked at me. She's like, well, yeah, that would be a lot easier. I'm like, then do it.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I mean, the databases are written to manipulate data.
Think about it this way. The database deals with data logic. So we're putting a stored proc in that deals specifically with finding the max value. That is data logic. When we bring it to the business logic layer, we add the increment to it. That's business logic. So, you're right.
I had an interview and it's been 8 or 9 years ago, but I went in there and there'd been a couple people that had been sent through by a recruiter, and they had failed the database stuff. And so the guy asked me, he's like, you have a person table and you have an address table. How do you join them? And I'm like, well, it depends on what you're trying to do. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, like if I want to find the people with their addresses, I do an inner join. If I want to find the people that don't have an address, I do a left outer. If I want to find the addresses that are orphaned from people, I do a right outer. And if I want to find all the possible combinations of people and addresses, I do a cross join. And he goes, and we're going to skip the SQL section. Let's go on with life. And apparently that was shocking based on some of the other people that had come through. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you don't understand a database, like you're really hurting yourself, because SQL does not change much. Like ANSI 92 SQL is still around, like from 1992.
Yeah.
Okay. There's developers that have got good jobs that are younger than that standard. And they're still using it. And if you don't know it, and you've been around a while, it shows that you have a complete lack of initiative. And that's all it shows.
Yeah.
So speaking of complete lack of initiative, another thing that shows that you're a bad developer is when your reaction to anything new or anything old is ew.
Ew.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. And basically this comes down to a few things. It's old technology is going to be on your radar because it actually does something. Somebody's using it. Like, we like to make fun of, COBOL and Fortran programmers and that kind of stuff, but they're still running critical systems on that. Delphi, the fact that I'm learning Delphi, I've had people say stuff to me. Like, I had one guy tell me that, well, this is going to be your first and last Delphi programming job. And I'm like, dude, most of the people doing this are nearing retirement age. There's the systems they wrote are still running.
Yeah.
You really think that, you're not ever going to have this? Come on, don't be a goob. Yeah. It's still perfectly usable, and people don't want to rewrite the system every couple of years. Like, most people live in the real world other than developers.
Of course, then there was my Halloween costume this year.
Yeah.
Which was Silverlight developer, will code for food.
Yeah. Well, Silverlight wasn't around long enough to really...
No, it wasn't. And there are technologies like that, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of flash-in-the-pan technologies, which, I mean, that's why people are more resistant to the newer stuff a lot of times, is because they've seen it. Mm-hmm. I didn't jump on the Silverlight bandwagon because I jumped on the VB6 web classes bandwagon.
Yeah.
And ActiveX documents and all that fun stuff, like way, way back. That didn't go anywhere. And so when Silverlight came out, I was just kind of like, I'll just wait and see. And that's what a lot of people do. I wasn't grossed out by it, or I didn't go, I don't want to learn it. I learned some stuff, but I didn't build anything mission critical in it.
Base your career off of it.
Right.
Like I heard horror stories about people that came out right when Silverlight did, got into the industry then and built their careers, like started to build their careers around it, and then had to start all over.
Yeah, of course, the thing is, if they switched to doing like Knockout JS or something like that, a lot of the whole data binding thing got lifted off of Silverlight, and it still worked.
Or even now Angular does.
Yeah.
Oh, I love the data binding with Angular.
Yeah, because you don't remember the bad old days.
No, I don't.
I've got a friend that swears up and down. He's like, I'm not going to use anything with data binding because he programs in VB.
Yeah.
Classic. And it sucked. And it sucked in .NET, like in WinForms and web forms. It was awful. And it was for years and years. And you finally just go, hey, they're not ever going to fix this. And that's one thing you really want to avoid. And it's not to say that this guy's a bad programmer, because he gets a lot of stuff done and it's solid.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And so you just don't want to do that. And the other thing too is you also need to bear in mind that you're working with people. And so when you're really insulting to their language as a whole, that doesn't help at all. Like if you're interacting with them, it's probably because you need to integrate with their system, or you need to port their system, or they're integrating their stuff with yours, and you need to work together, which means not being a jerk.
Yeah, that's the way people react. I mean, people are going to not want to help you if you treat them like that.
And it doesn't matter how truthful it is either. It's like telling somebody else that their kid's ugly. Like, okay, yes, that kid is observably ugly, and I told you about it, and what good did that do?
Yeah.
Because either you know or you don't know. Like, either way, it's just rude, so don't do that.
Hey guys, I just want to interrupt here real quick to tell y'all about a brand new conference that I'm going to be attending this coming April on the 21st and 22nd called Codeland. It's put on by our friends over at Code Newbies, and you can check out more about it at codelandconf.com. You might be a bad developer if you don't understand networking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and networking, there's a lot of there. Because it's just layers of abstraction on top of layers of abstraction. Like, I get why people aren't comfortable with it, but by the time you're a mid-level developer, you need to understand how networks work. Like, you should be able to set up a router.
Yeah.
And set up your network and go, okay, I'm doing my IP addresses this way. Do I want DHCP or not? I should be able to configure a firewall. I should know what a port is, like that kind of stuff. Because I've run into so many developers that like, oh, I can't, this thing is listening. I wrote this service to listen on this particular port. How do I open a port in the firewall?
Port, isn't that like a fortified wine?
No, not that kind of port. No, but I've run into a lot of developers that will do that, and they'll have some service listening on some particular weird port where they have to configure something, and then they go into Windows, and first of all, they don't know how ports work. They don't really understand IP addressing either, like the whole subnet masking and all that kind of stuff, and so they're just completely lost. And I'm going, you're crippling yourself. Like, you don't know how this stuff works.
We should do an episode on.
Yeah, I
think it sounds more like a series of episodes.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Like, we could probably do an episode on ports, an episode on.
Yeah, some of that stuff is going to be hard to do non-visually.
That's true. But
I mean, you ought to be able to do at least a minimum level of stuff. Like figure out where know where your host file is. Like if you have to mess with something, and know how to do basic network checks. So like if your app can't communicate with a server, well, why can't it communicate with a server? Can you ping the server from here? If you can't, now you know. And I've known developers that literally can't do that. They can't open a command prompt and go ping some address, or they can't do a trace route, and like it will make you bad really quick. Like you'll lose so much productivity to stuff that a network admin who's paid half of what you're paid probably, a very junior network admin, is going to jump in and go, what's wrong with this dude? He's supposed to be a computer guy. Yeah,
I did go hang out with the IT guys today when I was getting into hour 2 of the Windows update, and I'm like, guys, they're like, yeah, just kind of got to wait on it.
The other thing it hurts you on is if you're developing all your stuff on your box and then you're planning to deploy to multiple machines on the network, which is not an uncommon setup. If you don't understand how network components interact, you're not going to know how to deploy it. You're also going to make things really, really slow, more than likely. It's still easy to make things slow in that scenario, even if you do know. So you need to understand the underlying technology so that if you do make it slow, you can actually fix it. You might be a bad developer if you can't actually deploy software, speaking of deploying your software, on your platform and or do light server management on whatever it runs on. Right. And I don't mean like, jumping into Windows Server and go, oh, I know exactly where to find this in group policy. Yeah. But like knowing group policy exists, that kind of helps. Like, oh, I need to configure, how my machine updates Windows, even though those keys actually don't seem to work. That's probably a bad example, but like you have to be able to get onto a server. If you're doing web development and you don't understand IIS and you're doing ASP.NET, you're just lost. You're in a very, very, very bad spot. Like if you can't set up virtual directories, and you don't understand what an application pool is and those kind of things, you can't deploy that software. And the guy that can deploy it, you know what he's going to do? He's going to turn right around and ask you what has to be done to deploy this, and you're going to sit there looking dumber than a bag of hair. Like, you have to fix this. That's deficient. Like, get that sorted out. And this next one is one that really kind of irks me when it comes to developers, and that is, you are terrified of the command line. And my response to that is, really? Are there really developers that are terrified of the command line? Yep. On Windows, not on Linux, because they all died. Like immediately, Linus Torvalds just hit him with a hammer. Yeah, that's guys. My mother is in her 60s, can barely use Facebook, but uses command line in Linux. Yeah,
you can learn the command line.
Yeah, it's not hard. But a lot of people find it intimidating because they're used to dragging and clicking. Mm-hmm. And this is something, this same tendency is something I've noticed in a lot of Microsoft developers over the last, decade or so. They got really used to the visual designers in things, and then they couldn't switch to a text-based anything and keep it in their head what was going on. And they were unwilling, because that's really what it was. They're unwilling to do it the other way. It's not just the fear of the command line, but it's the fear of command type tools that really messes you up. And it's like, dude, you are programming. You are writing text that gets executed.
I don't like having to go all the way to the grunt file, to run it.
Right.
Or to the folder with the grunt file in it. So I wrote a batch script that I can just type.
And you put it in your path?
Yeah.
That's what I'd have done.
I can type that in, and it goes and it runs grunt, and then when I'm done and I need to if I need to go and do some command line git, I can just I have a back path.
Yeah. Yeah. I script things all the time. I just I don't understand why you would want to not be able to do that. If you're a programmer, you should have the ability to go, hey, this is a more efficient way to do things. That should be your headspace, is how can I tune this where it's less effort and where the machine does more of the work, because that's what you do all day.
Yeah.
That shows a inability to be in that headspace that is pretty bad. So another one, you might be a bad developer. Actually, you probably are. If you think math is hard is an acceptable reason to avoid doing something.
You don't have to be a genius at statistics or calculus, but having some degree of ability to actually do computation is kind of necessary for this job.
Yeah, and at least knowing how things work. I mean, up to, probably trig, geometry, you're not going to run into calculus much. I think I have maybe twice,
I know some people.
It's
very...
web, but yeah.
Very specialized.
Yeah, or games.
Yeah.
You might you'll have to do linear algebra if you're doing games. And I've had to do, I take that back. I have had to do a fair bit of linear algebra. But that's because I'm not particularly avoidant on some things. But
then again, I know some people that are doing VR research and stuff. So
yeah. And that's a whole nother, kettle of fish. But
realistically, you really should be able to do up to.
And you don't have to be all that great at it. It's more of a thing of having enough confidence to go, okay, I'm going to solve this problem using mathematics. Initially, that's what computers were. They were for computing things. They weren't for looking at pictures of cats. And there's a tremendous amount of power in there for being able to do math problems. So there's no reason not to be able to handle that.
No, you don't have to calculate pi to the nth, but you should know the difference between a sine and a tangent curve.
The thing is, I guess it's really that it typically is a excuse to not get things done. That's where I see this manifest more than anywhere else. Is somebody I don't want to do that, and I can say, oh, math is too hard. Somebody else will do it.
Huh?
Because hey, you're in a room full of engineering types.
That's true. That can happen. I think the problem isn't math. It's another word you used. Excuse.
Yeah, it is.
You should not ever have an excuse for not doing something.
Yeah, and I mean, there's stuff that's got advanced math in it that I've had to go get help on.
Yeah.
That is no joke. I mean, I reverse engineered the file format used by an industrial sewing machine. It's really interesting, when you start looking at, okay, what does it take for me to draw text on a curve? Knowing the character size and having to go, okay, I have this set of polygons I'm essentially rotating.
Yeah.
And I'm having to spread them evenly across the face of a curve when they're not fixed width. That is not fun.
Ooh.
That is where I said, yeah, the math is too hard, but I have a math person here.
Yeah.
Who's bored watching me code anyway. That's when you go to that. But normally you shouldn't be doing that.
Well, it shouldn't be an excuse. It should be a reason to learn more or go in search of someone who knows more.
Yeah, you get a specialist if it's really legitimately beyond it. But a lot of people just go, oh, that's too hard because it's got math, and I'm not going to do it. And I mean, this is more of a cultural problem. I don't think this is a problem in China.
Yeah.
or India. Like, this is an American problem.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, you do have to understand Boolean algebra.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's just basics.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're dealing with binary. Get over it. You need to be able to like handle hexadecimal and maybe octal on occasion, but probably not.
I haven't seen that much octal.
Yeah, I haven't either, but you'll occasionally see it in really old. Yeah. But
I would say the big thing what you really need to be able to do is handle Boolean algebra.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the big things you need to learn. What fascinates me is I found learning Boolean algebra easy.
Yeah.
Because it's
light switches in a sequence.
Well, it's logic.
It's just the way you arrange the wires and the switches.
I learned Boolean algebra in a philosophy class called logic. And then when I came back to computing, of course, I probably learned it in high school and just don't really remember that much. So that's why it was easier on me in college.
Probably,
philosophy. Yeah. But then I came back to it, learning it here, and I'm like, oh, yeah. I went and grabbed my logic book from college, and I'm like, I remember this.
Yeah, well, I mean,
because I kept that book.
The one that I see a lot of is where you have things that are like bit masks, and people go, "Oh, I have 7 and anded with 2." Well, what is that?
Where do you see that?
Or it'll be like 2 enumerated constants, constant for this and this, and you're saying like you're basically flipping switches on like a dialogue to say, "Okay, I want these things enabled and these things enabled."
Gotcha.
And so the dialogue state is 7. Effectively, that's its state, and that's a 1, a 2, and a 4 are the ones that are set. That's the bits that are set. And I've seen developers look at stuff like that for like 15 minutes and just throw their hands up because they don't know Boolean algebra. They can't understand the bit masking.
Okay. So when do you see stuff like this? I do
stuff like this.
See, like I get like the and, or the and/or, and the ors. I get that. Mm-hmm. And I've learned what you're talking about.
Right.
But like, where do you use stuff like that is my curiosity. Because I find it fascinating and I want to learn more about it. So the way I learn is by doing.
Yeah, I use this a lot, like in old web forms that have got a whole bunch of crap on one page. And I need to hide or show things. And it's a state machine and it's handling a whole bunch of different states. I'll use that. And then I've had developers that go, oh, well, I've got this value for the state, I'm setting it to not something.
Yeah.
Because I want to flip that bit.
Yeah, I do that with ngIfs. Okay.
It's that kind of stuff, but it's purely mathematical. It really compacts the code. And
I just haven't used it with numbers.
Yeah. Well, the numbers is like, it's a set of conditions, right? And you can, you can use like 64 bits if you need to. And, all those combinations, like in a flag enum. Well, I don't know if you can do that a flag enum, but you maybe will do a 32-bit. And that will cut out so much crap because then you can say, okay, this control is visible. Its visible value, which is a bit, is equal to the state anded with something, and that is is non-zero. In other words, that bit is flipped.
It just hit me what you're talking about, and I'm like, oh, I could do all sorts of interesting things.
Yeah, and a lot of that for me comes out of doing assembler and enjoying it and being one of the people that did, because that was one of the things I really liked. It's like, hey, you don't set something equal to 0 because you have to pull that out of memory. If it's already in a register, you just XOR it with itself and now it's 0.
Yeah. See, I would have enjoyed that. I never got to do assembler.
It's like being a wizard, except you don't have to have the robes and stuff. You're still unkempt because you're a developer. But anyway,
well,
yeah. But like, you should be able to understand that and follow it. Now, I get that, okay, that's not a very commonly used convention, but when it's used, it's used because it's needed. And that also means you don't have to be afraid of doing guesstimates, because if you know enough math, you know when you can let it slide. That's very true. That's an important point, is the more you know about math, the more you can estimate, like the better your estimates get. Yeah. And there's a pretty good rant by Zed Shaw about this, where he's like, I think he said something effective, please learn statistics or I will kill you all. And it was something the effect of, it's like, how frequently do you see developers test something over 10,000 iterations? It's like, why is that a statistically significant test? Like, what are they actually proving? Well, it does it a lot, I think. That's what they're saying. Like, it doesn't show any kind of confidence interval or anything like that, because they don't understand stats. Now, granted, my thing is you just like, go, okay, what what would be a high confidence interval, guesstimating it, and then we'll 10x that and then let it run.
Well, I always find it fascinating reading news articles by journalists who have never taken a statistics class in their lives.
And it shows.
Yeah. Stats is a big thing in psychology. I had 2 stats classes in undergrad and 2 very detailed stats classes in grad school for psych. You might be a bad developer if you actually legitimately believe that you can do well without communicating with others.
And, you know, I mean, this was a thing more our generation, I think, than the younger generation, because they've they've had that beaten out of them a little bit. Whereas our generation was like, oh, you got the hacker in the basement and he's a nerd and Trinity's going to show up. And, you know, it's like, that's not how that works. Like, the guy that's, you know, in some hacker collective, it's a collective. There's other people there. There's not these brilliant minds that they just isolate themselves in a basement and they get everything done.
Yeah, it's more like Mr. Robot, where they go hang out on Coney Island.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing. You got to collaborate with other people to the degree that you're actually able to be effective. Like, you could be the most brilliant programmer in the world, but if they lock you in a basement for 10 years and say, oh yeah, just develop apps and don't talk to anybody, 10 years is going to go by and you're going to be horrible because you're not going to have any kind of feedback loop on your own behavior or your own way of thinking about things. It's, you know, it's like being stuck on a desert island, you know, you're going to have a soccer ball and you're going to be screaming at it. Yeah. It's just it's not good. So you do have to work with other people. Mm-hmm. You have to realize other people are there. And the other thing about isolation that will really get you is if you like go to focus on a problem and you start digging into it. If you misinterpreted anything in a spec and you're not getting some sort of feedback from other people, it's real easy to go into a rat hole and think, oh, they need this because they used the wrong word.
That's happened.
Oh yeah. And
that's happened to the entire team before.
Yeah, and I've known developers that will spend weeks on stuff, and then it's like, oh, you throw all that out because somebody just, like, they didn't mean that. With that word, they were using what they probably thought was a smart word because they're talking to people they think are smarter than them, so they want to use big words. Nobody got any feedback, and I've watched people run off the rails for weeks. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to do that. Like, you want to keep those communication lines open because it's horrible to throw your work away after 2 weeks because it's not valuable. And
especially when you like put a lot into it.
Especially when people are paying you by the hour and you're a contractor.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always fun. And so the last one is you might be a bad developer. You are a bad developer if you don't use a scientific method to figure out bugs or to test new ideas. Like that feedback loop. If you ever remember grade school, like how the scientific method is supposed to work, which by the way is not seemingly how it works a lot of times in research academies, so don't like go there. But you know, the thing is you come up with a hypothesis and you test it and then you compare the results of what you thought you would get to what you got. And that proves or disproves the hypothesis. Well, it will add evidence till you get a large sample. It doesn't prove or disprove anything, but
actually it will
to put it in English
or fail to prove the null hypothesis. I know way too much about this. Sorry.
Yeah. Failures in this case will tell you a lot more than successes will.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the success is, hey, it worked. A failure says, hey, it didn't work. What can I infer based on what happened? And so failures are a lot of, you know, actually pretty valuable information. You don't want to be one of those coders that's like, okay, I'm working on this. Let me just copy something from Stack Overflow and put it in the code and just try to like patchwork those things together until I get something that works. I've made a career cleaning up after those kind of coders. Like I was like, oh, what was he trying to do? Oh, let me search for that. Oh, first result. Here's his code.
Stop that from happening today.
Yep. I go and I find the section of code that he copied and pasted and I delete it and I rewrite it every time.
Yep.
Because there's some yahoo on the internet that just wrote code that's running in my system. What? No, it's gone. Sorry. That's crazy because it indicates that the person did not form a hypothesis. They didn't test. And so they don't know what the conditions are for success. And they sure as heck don't know what the conditions are for failure, which probably means it is a failure. Just because out of the set of things, most of them are failures. So it's just the way it is. The other thing is you can't just form a hypothesis either. You've got to actually go and test. I've worked with a couple of developers. I've had interactions with a few at different points. You know, where I had a developer that was saying that something was doing something to, I forget what it was. It was overriding the click of every button in the DOM in HTML.
Really?
Yep. Web page pops up. You have a button element. This thing controls the clicks. Your clicks aren't going through except through them.
Interesting.
Commercial component. That was their working hypothesis. Did they test it? No.
Nope.
Their test was, I put a button out here with a CSS class and an ID that I copied from another page that has this other thing on it, and it didn't work. The click event didn't fire. Of course, part of it too was that they didn't quite have the whole, CSS syntax of, a class versus an ID. But there's that when they're trying to find it with a jQuery, and so it's a null set. But they didn't test the hypothesis, right? Like to go, yeah. And so, and I had this discussion, and I'm sitting there going, okay, did you take the classes, the way that button is being identified? Did you change the ID? Did you change the classes? Yeah. And change the code that's supposedly hooking this up? Well, no, I just copied it. It's like, then you didn't test. Like you formed a hypothesis and then you stopped. Are you running for office? Because I just formed that hypothesis and I ran with it. So it's true, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Like, don't do that.
Okay. With that, that pretty much
is my opportunity to be very mean.
Yeah. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close it out, Will, what do you have for us this week for tricks of the trade?
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and throw something out. We talked about the scientific method and how that applies to coding. And I want to point out to you that this applies to the rest of your life, actually. When you have a variance in routine, you should actually see whether that benefits you or not, how it makes you feel. In other words, you should track stuff. This is something I've gotten into the habit of doing is creating data that I can look at. It's why I have my own time tracker that I use that is outside of work. Like I copy my stuff from that to the one at work so that I have this data that I can look at. And I do a monthly review of kind of how I feel about everything at different points. I do a weekly one as well at the end of the week as far as like my stress level and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I do this is because this allows me to have the ability to form a hypothesis. In other words, if I'm going, hey, I'm feeling really, really stressed here lately. Why is that? Well, okay, I'm working on stuff that I don't enjoy. I'm working on a lot of stuff I don't enjoy. Or I had 4 meetings a day all week, and I can start to correlate the contents of my mind. You need to be able to do this. Like this should not just be a coding thing. It's a thing of I want to form a hypothesis about how I can make my life better. And then I want to test that hypothesis. I want to see if that hypothesis worked. And if it did, then I want to adopt that process. And in fact, you'll actually be able to prove that it made your life better because you formed a hypothesis and you tested it and you got results. And results are what matter. That's all I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.